Okay, well, welcome everyone. We'll get started now. We're on the hour and we're thrilled you could join us today. And we wanted to acknowledge who's here today, the members of the project teams funded through the Supporting Mental Health of Those Most Affected by COVID-19, the MH COVID initiative, and others from these project networks. And we're also joined by members of the Public Health Agency and the KDE Hub team. My name is Alice Schmidt-Hambidge, and I'm one of two scientific co-directors, along with my colleague, Dr. Colleen McMillan, who's here today, and she'll be wrapping up with us at the end of the webinar. We're really pleased you could join us today. And while we're meeting virtually in our meeting today, we'd like to acknowledge the land that we're on. The KDE Hub is located at Renison University College, University of Waterloo in Ontario, on the traditional unceded territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, land promised to the Six Nations of the Grand River. June is National Indigenous History Month, and yesterday, June 21st, was National Indigenous Peoples Day, which are opportunities for us to reflect on our collective history and to renew our shared responsibility in advancing truth and reconciliation. It is also a welcome space to celebrate and to honor diverse nations and cultures and outstanding and continued contributions from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Personally, as a settler on this land, I recognize I have more to learn, and I'm willing and committed to doing so. If you would like, I invite you to post your own location in the chat. This brings us to why we're gathering today. So we know that many MH COVID projects are planning for or engaging in community-based evaluation. And so the main purpose of this webinar is to help build capacity in this area. We wanted to acknowledge the diversity of the projects within the MH COVID initiative, knowing that each project team has unique needs when it comes to your evaluations. While this webinar is one way that we're hoping to support you, it's not the only way. You'll also have the opportunity to book a consultation with folks from the Center for Community-Based Research, and we'll share how you can do that at the end of this webinar. In addition to building capacity for community-based evaluation, this webinar is also an opportunity for MH COVID project and others gathered today to interact and to learn from one another. And on the theme of learning with and from one another, before I introduce Dina, Rich, and Deanne from the Community-Based Research Center, I'll briefly turn it over to Dr. Katie Cook, who will talk with you about a hub-led study that we hope you will take part in. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Alice. So some of you may be aware, we previously started this study back in April, phase 1 of the study. It is a concept mapping study that the Hub is currently running to better understand what momentum looks like. So what's needed in order to, what resources and actions are needed to create and sustain momentum in your work in the field of mental health and or mental health promotion in Canada. So phase 1, we did brainstormings, we collected everyone's ideas in response to that prompt, which I just outlined about creating and sustaining momentum. And now we're moving on to phase 2 of the concept mapping process, where we take all of those ideas, or we ask participants from MH COVID projects to take all of the ideas that came out of phase 1 and all the synthesized ideas, and to sort them into categories that make sense for you. You label those categories, and then you rate each of those statements based on their importance for your work and their relevance for your work. All of this takes place in the same software that was used for the brainstorming phase, so that's Group Wisdom. You can access the Group Wisdom software if you would like to participate by using the QR code on the screen or the link that Annetta just dropped in the chat. Thank you, Annetta, for doing that. This one is a little bit more time consuming than the brainstorming. Could take about 45 minutes of your time. So we've made it so that you can leave and come back and your work will be saved. The way to do that is when you first click that link, you'll be assigned a random anonymous username. Make sure you write that down and create a password for yourself. When you then go back to revisit your work, if you have done some sorting and then you want to finish it, you can just click the link again and click log in, and you can see I have it circled on the right side of this screen here. So you don't create a new password, you click log in and you type in that anonymous username that you were provided that you hopefully wrote down and the password that you hopefully remember, and then you can go back to your saved work and continue your sorting and rating process. So that phase of the study is now officially open, and we really look forward to learning more from you and continuing to work with you to map this concept of momentum in the field of mental health promotion. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Katie. And we look forward to that momentum continuing. It's been a great start to the project. We're thrilled to be partnering with the Center for Community-Based Research for this webinar. And CCBR is located in Waterloo, Ontario, and they conduct and promote community-based research with an approach to research that is community-driven, participatory, and action-oriented. I'd like to introduce to you our CCBR webinar leads. So Dr. Dina Taha, who's a senior researcher, Dr. Rich Jansen, executive director, and Deanne D'Souza, who's a center research, who will help facilitate discussions. Welcome, Deanne, Rich, and Dina, Rich, and Deanne. Glad you're here with us today.
Thank you so much, Alice. I'll now share my own screen. Give me 1 second. And yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Dina Taha. I am a senior researcher at the Center for Community-Based Research. I am speaking to you today from Toronto, which is home for many Indigenous nations, such as the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Just a couple of points. I'm sure some of you are seeing the closed captioning. Feel free to turn it on at any point. This is a workshop that we're designing to be interactive. So keep your phone or like a web browser close to you, because we will be having a few hands-on activities. And yeah, just a little bit about the Center for Community-Based Research. We are a Canadian not-for-profit organization. We champion community-based research, evaluation, and engagement, basically through partnering with communities and other organizations in order to promote, such as KDE Hub, in order to promote equity, social justice, and positive social change through both research and evaluation. And I'll be leaving more information at the end of the workshop today in case you have if you'd like to know more about our work. This is just a brief agenda to walk us through today's workshop. Just to emphasize, this is one of 2 parts. And in today's workshop, we're going to be introducing the concept of community-based evaluation. What are the fundamentals or foundations of conducting community-based evaluation? We will focus, the majority of the workshop is going to focus on phase 1, and you will know shortly why we emphasize on that. We emphasize that phase that much. And then we're going to start the conversation around evaluation planning, just to connect it to the previous phase. So for the learning objectives over the course of today, we will focus on, again, what is community-based evaluation, but also why community-based evaluation, and how is it different from other approaches, and why might it be more appropriate for your group or your organization. We're also gonna, well, the majority of the workshop is going to focus on the how piece and how to build capacity in your organization or even on an individual level. But also I invite you to be mindful or to be reflective always about the so what, like why are we doing this approach and what are the outcomes of it? Because in community-based research, we'd like to think that we're bringing research and practice together, or bringing action to research or evaluation. And I understand in our brief discussions with the KDE Hub team that there were some like needs assessment that was conducted. So I invite you to reflect on, and I understand that some of those needs identified gaps such as building partnerships, sustainability and scaling, knowledge mobilization, and understanding or acknowledging multiple ways of knowing. So this is highly appropriate for the discussion we're having today. So I invite you to be reflective on how community-based evaluation can respond to those needs or priorities. As just to reiterate what Alice mentioned, that this workshop or the workshop series is part of a suite or a package to support you. We will be talking a little bit more about the one-on-one coaching near the end. And as well, I will be, or we are attaching in those slides, and the KDE Hub team is going to be sharing with you some resources that we've curated for the purpose of the workshop. This includes like workbooks, because some people might like more hands-on work, or an infographic to start the conversation in your organization. And I'm happy to go through it in more details. Okay, so let's start with a quick warm up. And here I would invite you to grab your phone or your web browser. It takes some time, so I invite you to start right away. Just take a picture of the QR code or insert slido.com to your web browser and add the code number 7097451. And I'd like to invite you, and there again, there are no wrong answers. Good, I see test here, so that's working. If when you hear the word evaluation, what comes to your mind? So I see the code and entered, which means that you are in the right spot. Just add feel free to write the word or two that shows what evaluation, the word evaluation resonates with you. And I see the words trickling, so that's good. Couple of tests. Oh, tests. Maybe it is relevant to what evaluation resonates with some of you. And that's an interesting take. But I see outcomes, which is definitely a big part of it, but Rich is going to talk to us about how evaluation can be evaluating processes as well. We see improvement, definitely, surveys, data, so there's focus on the methods here, feedback, definitely, performance, qualitative, which is definitely one way to gather data. Accountability, I like that one quite a bit, measuring, planning. So yeah, definitely it seems that the majority is on the same page, and I'm hoping that the workshop today will address some of those questions. I will not stop the Slido, so feel free to continue to add to the Slido board. It will remain open, and I'm sure the KDE Hub team and us can use this as useful data later on. So thank you so much for participating. Okay, so absolutely, we just I want to share with you a working definition that might resonate with many of the words or the brainstorm that we just had. So we'd like to think of evaluation as an organized approach to collecting information, whether about activities or impact, so this outcome piece, but also the activities of the processes that assess the accomplishment and effectiveness of a program or an organization for that matters, and it helps improving it. So I saw improvement as well, so that's good to be on the same page. And there are several ways to approach evaluation, but for simplicity, let's think about it in terms of a continuum. If you have on one end, on your left-hand side, this expert conventional, the way we're used to doing evaluation, the expert-based evaluation, where you bring an external evaluator, an individual or a group with expertise, and they conduct the evaluation independently. On the other hand, community-based evaluation focuses on champions and centers the community, and it involves that including different stakeholders and who can be different from one project to the other, one organization to the other. And we bring them together to work in partnership and to draw on their own expertise. And we're going to start talking a little bit about how that can be beneficial to your evaluation planning. So for those who like definitions, this is how we think about community-based approaches to research and evaluation at the Center for Community-Based Research. It's an approach that involves active participation of stakeholders. By stakeholders, we're referring to those who live and are affected by the issue being studied, and we include them in all phases of the research or evaluation for the purpose of producing useful results to make positive changes. Feel free at any point to add comment. I will be pausing throughout the the workshop to see if there are any questions, but this is supposed to be interactive. So feel free to add in the chat any comments or ideas that you would like to build on, whether regarding this definition or anything else that comes up. Oh, and that's our Rich. Rich always talks about this as our secret code, and I'll talk more about this in the few coming slides, the 33411. But yeah, again, I wanted to pause here a little bit to just have this reflective lens to our discussion today about why community-based evaluation and how might it be different and support our evaluation plan a bit better. So I won't go through all the themes that came up here, but those are some of the themes that we've gathered across the years with working with our different partners about how community-based evaluation have helped their programs and activities. And so I invite you to be intentional about this why throughout the workshop today. And because in some of the activities, we're going to ask you to start working on bits and pieces of your evaluation plan. So yeah, this is just an invitation to reflect how community-based evaluation can benefit your group or organization. Just general broad strokes that community-based evaluation, we'd like to think of it as it helps draw better on local expertise and improving program relevance so it meets your unique needs. So you can tailor it however you want. It definitely enhances the engagement and participation of your stakeholders. It can definitely contribute to building trust and enhancing transparency within the community and within your organization and the stakeholders that it supports. And we also would like to think that it creates more meaningful data that helps you more directly in order to, like we've seen in the brainstorming activity, a lot of people were talking about this improvement. So that definitely has a more tailored response to how this improvement could look like. And Deanne, feel free to just let me know at any point if there are any pressing comments or questions. I'm happy to pause for a minute or two. Okay, so fundamentals of the community-based evaluation, the 33411. We often talk about community-based evaluation or research that it includes 3 hallmarks, 3 goals, 4 phases, and 11 steps or items. And that's what I'll walk you through over the next couple of slides, or more than couple. So the hallmarks of community-based evaluation, 3 hallmarks. It is stakeholder-driven, particularly that it's always driven and relevant to stakeholders. Again, those are the people with lived experiences or program providers, educators, governments, etc. And we're going to talk more about the stakeholder mapping at a later point in today's workshop. Community-based evaluation is also participatory, and we always strive for this equitable engagement and equitable control for designing the evaluation agenda or throughout the activities of the evaluation. We are always trying to be reflective of the mutual benefit between the among the different stakeholders and the research team or the evaluation team. And that should be reflected in the design and the implementation. Finally, community-based evaluation is always driven by action. It's action-oriented. The purpose is always to change or striving towards social justice, using the findings to make changes to practices, programs, and policies. So again, like this theme of improvement is always a guiding hallmark to our work when we're doing community-based evaluation. The second 3 is for 3 goals of community-based evaluation. So you will see there are 3 pieces to this: building relationships, or we'd like to call it also the community mobilization piece, learning together, or the knowledge production piece. And at the bottom, there's sharing knowledge, or the knowledge mobilization piece. And while most whether research or evaluation, conventional research approaches to research or evaluation focuses on the knowledge production piece or the learning together, it is not enough for community-based evaluation. And that's why we will spending the majority of our time today focusing on that first bit about building the relationship through the laying foundation phase. And also, yeah, knowledge mobilization relates to the action-oriented hallmark, which we just discussed. Maybe I'll go through this slide and just heads up, this slide is about to fill up quite a bit. So I'll walk you through it slowly, but because it is one of the, it is the central slide from today, we'd like to think of this as our GPS or our roadmap. We always think along those four, like those four circles or ovals represent the four phases of community-based evaluation. And we'd always think along this map in any community-based evaluation project or any project at CCBR. And it helps guide us through where we're at. Again, let me just highlight them. So the first step, which is the focus of today, is laying the foundation. This is when, and again, I'd like to emphasize that even though we're going to walk you through the technical aspects or like the steps today of like how actually what's the checklist under this phase. There's also a relational aspect to it, like we just acknowledging that there are human interactions and constant negotiation between the different stakeholders. So you're often going to see the technical aspect, but also the relational one. The next phase is evaluation planning, and that includes the designing the research questions and collecting data, or like planning how you intend to collect the data or the information that you need in order to start analyzing, which is step 3 or phase 3 rather, information gathering and analysis. And finally, acting on the findings, which is the knowledge mobilization piece. You will notice that that phases 2 and 3 are common across the board with any evaluation. The contribution of community-based evaluation is in phases 1 and 4 above there. And again, yeah, that's why we'd like to invest more time unpacking what the skills and capacities that those two entail. You will notice also that there's a feedback loop between the phase 3, information gathering and analysis, and phase 2, which is evaluation planning. And we think of that as a strength, that it gives the community-based evaluation some sort of flexibility in order to learn and relearn and adapt according to the kind of information we are getting. So it is okay in community-based evaluation to make changes and revisit, guided by, and we'll come to that at a later point, guided by your advisory committee as well. You will notice the cyclical or the arrow from phase 1 to 4. And that's to emphasize that we don't have to do it all at once. We don't have to find all answers and evaluate everything all at once. It is okay to do it over a few cycles in order to just make sure that you have accurate information, or that it's even feasible. One final thing about this slide is we divide the phases. Ooh, and look at that, like 90s vibe in like slide sharing. So yeah, so we'd like to think of this as the first 3 phases as the doing the evaluation, and the last one is using this evaluation in order to continue the cycle and to restart the cycle, but also in order to start action. And the reason why I use that 90s flashy animation is because we'd like to emphasize the stakeholder engagement at every single stage, and that will come clear as we move forward with the different phases and steps. So I'll pause here for a second, and it looks like we're doing good on time.
Just gonna end this.
Go ahead. Sorry. So yeah, I'll pause here for a second to see if there are any questions, but also to invite you to reflect a little bit. I know it's a lot of information in a short period of time, but I wonder if there are any ideas that stood out to you, and whether what you've heard so far about community-based evaluation, how does it align with the principles or values of your group or organization? And in your experience, how might community-based evaluation address the specific challenges that is faced within the community that you work in? I see Tamara raised her hand, and I'm happy to pause for a few minutes to take any comments. Please go ahead, Tamara.
Yeah, I mean, this might not be the right place to raise this. There might be a better time to chat about this. One thing that I'm curious if you have any advice on is that I work at a nonprofit that is focused on like youth mental health and advocacy. And so we do try to involve youth in the work that we do across the organization. And the biggest challenge that we have is that, these are people that are typically in like college and university. They have a lot of other extracurriculars. They're quite busy. And so it's really hard to find the balance between involving them in our work, but also not taking up too much of their time. And when I think about like some of these evaluation pieces, like, if I want to do community-based evaluation properly, it does require a bit of a time commitment from other people because we need to be able to move forward, and like, we can't wait months and months and months between each step to some extent. And so if you have any advice on balancing that tension between wanting to possibly do community-based evaluation, but also not wanting to, even if we like offer an honorarium, like they have a lot of other things on their plate. And so how to balance that community-based evaluation with like the realities of the evaluation might not be the community's first priority, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I did take a look at some of the questions that were during the registration, and I noticed that there was a lot of interest in engaging youth like data collection from youth or arts-based methods that engages youth. And we do have a few resources and tips to share with you near the end when things clear up a little bit, because again, Tamara, the devil is in the detail with on how to go about things. And I'm gonna stop here and check in with Rich if you have any like off the top of your head quick responses, or if you think we should just wait until we get to that point.
No, I'll just simply add, hi, everyone, first of all. Yeah, great question. And I think that's part of what we will be doing through each of the phases and steps, talking about engagement and thinking about multiple ways to engage people, that not everyone has to be engaged in everything. But there's multiple mechanisms or ways of engaging people, and then being smart and strategic and inviting different people into those different mechanisms, right? So that not everybody has to be involved in everything. There's multiple ways to get involved. I think we'll start to uncover some of those things as we march along.
And I also see Johanna's hand, so feel free to go ahead, Johanna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Johanna. My pronouns are she, her, and I work for the Black Coalition for AIDS Prevention. I'm a mental health peer worker. I just wanted to say that I don't know who exactly that was, their name, but I appreciate that question being asked, because I do also feel like for our work, you want to incentivize people, but then you want to engage people beyond just thinking that incentives are the only way to get them. Like you would hope, every community worker hopes that people are there because they really want to be, but life happens. And, there's all these different obstacles in life, especially when you're dealing with vulnerable populations. So I feel like it's more so like a comment. I really respect that question because I'm trying to find really great culturally relevant, community-based strategies to engage my specific population. But I also am like concerned that like, you know, our work is nonprofit, so it's like how much of our funding and our resources goes towards incentivizing people when honestly we want people to be there just because they want to be there, you know. So finding ways to like have people be happy to be there, but then also I'm conflicted. I go back and forth. I'm like, people also have a lot of things to do, so of course we need to incentivize them, provide, you know, maybe transportation support, TTC tokens, food, things like that. But it's just like this constant internal conflict I have where I'm like, okay, where's the balance? Because I'm trying to find like that equilibrium with like my work and my strategy. So yeah, like all I'm really saying is, yeah, I feel you, and yeah.
And I'm glad, and I checked the chat quickly, and it seems that some people are wrestling with the same issues. So this might be, if we have time, there's always room for us to co-create and like, yeah, brainstorm about ways to go about this. But sometimes it's all about, and like this will unfold in the next slides, and mostly also in the next workshop, uh, that there are techniques other than in like monetary incentives or honorariums. The arts-based methods, for example, can be more appealing to certain demographics than others, but I'll put a hold on that for now because it seems that it's something that resonates with a lot of you. So maybe we can dedicate a larger time to it near the end after you've seen it all. I wonder if we should break a little bit now, quickly for 5 minutes. Maybe we can be back at now it's 2:02, 2:07, uh, and we can continue to have this conversation. And I see more questions in there, so we'll attend to that as well. Thank you very much for this engagement. I'll see you back at 2:07. All right. I invite everyone, if you're comfortable, to just give me a sign that you're back, whether it's a thumbs up or switching on your video if you're happy to do it. Thank you, Johanna, and everyone. Sorry, my screen is limited, so I don't see everyone. But I am happy to start moving if people are okay with it. Let me see. Oh, and I spent some time reflecting on the questions, and it seems that it's not just a question; it's like a trend where everyone is like having like there are certain themes that everyone is wrestling or struggling with. So I wonder if the chat could be a good tool for us to start these conversations and maybe network. And I'd like to think of it, yeah, again, as a networking opportunity where people can identify each other and maybe like schedule some like different time for them to connect and share expertise and ideas about this. And again, I am happy to address those general themes near the end once we have a better sense of community-based evaluation, especially that this coming like discussion about laying the foundation is very relevant to how do we in fact engage or appeal to particular groups. I saw a comment about engagement fatigue. So yeah, those are all relevant issues that we can address in the coming few slides. So sorry, I thought someone unmuted. Okay, so the first phase of community-based evaluation, laying the foundation, we always identify for, I'm hesitant to say the word steps because there's this iterative nature between the different steps and even phases in community-based evaluation, but there are items, or let's call them steps for now, that we have to address when we're starting this initial phase of laying the foundation. The first one would be identifying the stakeholders and organizing your steering committee, and we'll talk more about that. There's also identifying assumptions and making sure we're all on the same page. And then Rich is going to walk us through the theory of change and how it translates to, for example, a logic model, amongst other things. And finally, identifying the purpose of the evaluation, which will be we're going to break into breakout rooms for everyone to start reflecting on how do we start, because often people get stuck in that stage where they have to identify what is the purpose of the evaluation or the evaluation purpose statement. So for identifying stakeholders at the beginning of your evaluation, it's always helpful to ask yourself that question: who is your stakeholders? And obviously it can be different from one project to the other. At the core of it, and we touched on that before, stakeholders are any individuals or groups who have stake in the issue that you're addressing or trying to evaluate. And they have, again, stake or interest in the success of this evaluation. Stakeholder mapping is one way to go about identifying the stakeholders. And we'd like to think of this as like in the middle, we have like this diagram shows, in the middle, there's the people with lived experience. And then in the outer circle, there are the influencers. Those are the program providers or folks who impact the lives of those who live or people with lived experience of the issue. And then at the outer circle, there are the sustainers. Those are the funders or people with power to help, like policymakers, to help make the organization or the program sustainable. And it is essential, and you can tell that these are not solid colors, because in designing your project, it is important to remember that these categories are not always absolute. People wear different hats all the time. So someone who might be someone with lived experience can also be a service provider, etc. So it is at the core about leveraging the experience and collective wisdom of all those who are involved. And it is highly encouraged for the participation of all people across all the three categories, to have them in, to have like representation from all those three categories. And we're going to talk about the how can we engage them and how can they be participating, keeping in mind this participation fatigue notion. Maybe people can share, if you're up for it, or if you have any ideas, you can share in the chat some ways to engage stakeholders that were successful for you or your organization in the past. And maybe Deanne, if anything comes up, we can reflect on it. So I see for those who joined, okay, funder equals sustainer. Yes, so we definitely think of funders as under the category of sustainers. So I'm glad that there is some conversation in the chat.
There's also a question from Brady about, I guess, the difference or what's better, the difference between like a survey to consult with evaluation or versus like interview style feedback sessions. So like, is there a difference? What's better? What's worked?
Yeah, so we will definitely get to the, so let me, so if you see this diagram on the left, this is our roadmap that we showed. Right now, we're in the initial stage of laying the foundation. Once we start thinking about stage number 2, research planning, which we won't get into in details in this workshop, but we will introduce. And so we will start talking about methods in that stage. But at this point, we're just laying the foundation. We're just identifying who should be on the table. What are we on the same page about why we're doing this evaluation? How do we start designing our evaluation and purpose statement? So we'll get to that point definitely at a later point.
There's also a comment I really love here about how they've stopped using the word stakeholder and now use community contributor because stakeholder has been historically a colonial term. That's
Yes.
something that's come up, I believe, too.
We've had that conversation internally as well at the CCBR because of like the history about the word stake and how it can it's not appropriate in certain contexts, especially indigenous context. And we are like playing around with different words to accurately represent or accurately reflect what the term stakeholder represents. So that would be I would be curious to see if people came up with other terms. So contributors is definitely one of the top contenders in our discussion. So thank you for that. So now after you've identified the stakeholder, after you've conducted your stakeholder mapping exercise, you now know who should be on the table, understanding the subtleties that people could be wearing different hats and can be representing different voices, having this intersectional approach to having like identifying your stakeholders. Now it's time to start thinking about ways to involve those groups in your project. And there are a few ways to do it. The traditional way is as participants, and I'll talk about that at the end. We also like to champion having, someone mentioned that, like the peer-to-peer support, but having, evaluation, including participants or including stakeholders in evaluation as part of the evaluation team. The advisory committee also plays a big role in steering and in giving advice and like guiding the project or your evaluation. So having representation from different stakeholders in the steering committee could be one way to engage or involve stakeholders. And then as evaluation participants, they can play various roles. So that could be through consultations throughout the evaluation, or as participants for surveys or data collection purposes or focus groups. They could provide like feedback on the preliminary analysis. So once you have once you collect your information, you start analyzing it, they can give feedback on those initial stages, or even during the implementation. Like piloting, for example, they can give feedback on that. And we will be talking more about involving participants in the next workshop. I know there's a lot of eagerness about how to address that. We will start the conversation here, but there's more to come in in the future, in the next workshop, but it is important for us to start strong, and laying the foundation is an important feature, or an important tenet of community-based evaluation. And you will also notice that there are those two working cogs at the top of this diagram. Those are the steering committee, or sometimes called advisory committee or community advisory board, whatever you want to call it. And then there's the evaluation team. So you can think of the steering committee as the guiders and the evaluation team as the doers. And your steering committee will, again, help provide and guide and offer oversight for the project or the evaluation activities. So a little bit more about the steering committee, because it often plays an integral role in the evaluation process. So before the evaluation team does anything, they should always vet the ideas through this group or the steering committee. Often the steering committee is made up, again, of various stakeholders of the program. Their job is to guide the evaluation through each step of the process. So usually they meet regularly throughout the evaluation or the project in general, in order to offer feedback or steer or reassess possibly. And it can, having a steering committee is not just symbolic. They can actually make the process more relevant, more feasible, and it can be structured in various ways to meet the stakeholders' needs. Once you've identified your, again, who needs to be on that table, you want to make sure they're all on the same page. They all have the same understanding of what is community-based evaluation, why community-based evaluation. So what are the common assumptions and understanding of this evaluation, or what it entails? So people might have different, even if they seem initially on the same page or have the same understanding, they might have different goals or understanding of these goals. They also might have different expectations about the evaluation, also in terms of not just the assumptions, but the resources. So the capacity for research, time, who's doing what, the roles, and funding obviously is a big piece of that. Can we afford that scale of evaluation? So it is important that there is a shared understanding at the outset of an evaluation, again, about the purpose and the principles of community-based evaluation. It is a good idea to build conversations about what are the expectations, what are the shared assumptions at the beginning of this process. Could you think of any other assumptions or things, ideas or expectations that need to be vetted or agreed on at the beginning of this process? And I'm so sorry that I'm unable to check the chat, but Diane, I'm counting on you to keep me up to speed. So keep the ideas coming. Theory of change. Now that we've identified the stakeholders and how to make sure that they're all on the same page in terms of the why and the what of evaluation, we start working, like we roll our sleeves and we start working on the how. And now, Rich, I'd like to pass it to you to give us a quick overview about the theory of change and the purpose statement. Are we able to spotlight Rich? Because I notice I am being spotlighted.
Rich is also now spotlit.
Perfect.
Thanks, Dina. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about step number 3. And by the way, when we say steps, I like to think of these not so much as walking steps, which is quite a linear way of thinking of steps, but more like dance steps, where they're kind of done roughly together, but maybe in different orders, and they maybe are influencing each other. So step number 3, this is like all steps, it's an important step that we do collaboratively, that we do together in highlighting really what the boundary of the evaluation is. What are we evaluating? And one way to create that common understanding of what we're evaluating is through a theory of change. And with theory of change, I like to think of really two main words that expresses a theory of change. One word is activities, what you do, and the other word is outcomes. What are you hoping will be achieved by what you do? So sometimes when you write out a theory of change, you start with the word if. If we do this, that's the activities, and then list those activities. And then the second big word is then. Because of those activities, something will happen, right? That's the something will change because of that intervention of those activities. And that change is what we call outcomes. Sometimes also the word impact is used. So really, what is your theory of what you're doing and how that's leading to some sort of change, whether that change is at the individual level or something that's more collective, like an organization or a community, or maybe it's a network or society, or whatever your level of intervention is trying to influence and change. So that's in a nutshell what a theory of change is. And again, this is not something that one person does at their desk, but really is in that spirit of that second hallmark that Dina talked about in community-based research, participatory, that we do this together, coming up with our understanding of what are actually we're trying to do with the program or the intervention that we have. And one way to express your theory of change, or a very common way, is through a program logic model. And I'm sure many of you have experience with that or seen program logic models. And so if you have examples of logic models, you can throw some of the links in the chat if they're public ones. But let's just unpack a little bit about what do we mean by program logic model, and then I'll show you a couple of examples as well to get your mind thinking about your own program. So in a logic model, there's often different components. The two main components, as I mentioned before, are about the activities. That's what you're doing, describing your strategies. And then you can see at the bottom are the outcomes. And in this case, we divide them up at intermediate, immediate, intermediate, and long-term. That's kind of a chronological way of thinking of outcomes. There's other ways of thinking of outcomes, like individual or collective, and there's other ways as well. But some description of the change that you're looking for. In addition, you can see two other words on this screen. One is inputs. Those are that's the resource that enables the activities to happen. So what are you putting into the gas tank, so to speak, to enable you to do the activities? And then the output, so those are the tangible things, the products that come as a result of your activities. And usually these are the countable things. And you often see, like in an AGM or an annual report of an organization, like how many people are served, how many workshops did you have, how many, those kinds of things. How many reports did you produce? On the next slide, we have kind of a classic template for a logic model. And you can see it's divided into two main parts, again, the processes and the outcomes. And on the process, the blue side, you can see the relationship between inputs, activities, and outputs. I think if you animate it one more time, Dina, we'll get the lines that are in there. And then on the red side, you see the outcomes. And again, here's short-term, intermediate, and long-term. And at the bottom, there's some extra bells and whistles that logic models can have. And sometimes people put assumptions, or maybe the vision or values or their mission named right in there, or maybe strategic directions, as well as sometimes some external elements and some forces that are impinging on your particular program, that those sometimes are also acknowledged. And so you can see that in an evaluation, really what we're doing is asking questions about your theory of change. It's an interrogation of your theory of change. If you're asking questions about the blue, about the processes, it's a process evaluation. If you're asking questions about the red, to what extent did you achieve these, or maybe you achieved some other things that you weren't expecting, then that's an outcome evaluation. And an evaluation can be a process evaluation, it can be an outcome evaluation, it can be both. And we'll talk in a moment about your purpose statement, which will clarify which type of evaluation that you're trying to go for. So if this is kind of like a classic template, I'm going to show you two program logic models, and then where you'll see elements of those that template, but in very different ways. So this is a kind of more of a traditional logic model, I guess you can say, where you have at the top, this is a top-bottom kind of a logic model as opposed to a left and right one, where at the top you have the activities and at the bottom you have your outcomes. And this theory of change was with a program working with refugee newcomers, and it was an innovation program. So it was a program where coming into the program, there was no really other models, not many other models to look to. And at the heart of the program was this idea that newcomers often have a choice between, do I learn language, English language, or do I get a job? Because often those are conflicting realities. And in this intervention, it was, why don't we have the language training within the workplace? So that was the big idea. And you can see at the top, it's on the left side, there's some activities that happened before employment. So the red boxes, the pre-employment support, and then the initial workplace support once an employer was identified. And then on the blue is really the core of the intervention, and that's why it's kind of highlighted more darkly, is when newcomers have employment, there's really two levels of intervention that are happening. That there are some activities around the language instruction itself, and then there's some activities about supporting the newcomer in that particular workplace that they are in. And you can see the arrows moving from left to right. The theory of change there, the theory is that you need to have that pre-employment support in order to better make it more possible for you to thrive once you are in the workplace. And in the workplace, you need both types of support, language training and vocational support. You can't just do the language instruction, which is how the program started, but then they realized that, no, we need to actually have vocational support, that the workplace needs to also adapt to the newcomers. So that's the top half. And in the bottom half, you can see all the blue box, the green boxes, which are different levels of outcomes. I won't go through them. But again, this one is, it uses language of the Federal Immigration Department. They like to talk about immediate, intermediate, and ultimate outcomes. And so it used that language because it's the language of that particular settlement sector. And you can see the different outcomes, both individual as well as more system level outcomes. Off to the side, you can see that in this case, not all logic models have this, but in this case, they included evaluation as a set of activities that was integral to the program because they were dealing with innovation. And so they had this evaluation that was constantly speaking into the program development over the 3 years of the project. And probably the most important piece on this particular logic model is in the top left. Do you see that? V17, April 2020. V stands for version. This was the version 17 of the logic model. So there were many iterations of this and lots of conversations and learning as we're going and evaluation as a talking partner with the program implementers. We'll talk about this in a moment when we talk a little bit about purpose statements and developmental evaluation. This is one type of evaluation where evaluation is actually helping to create and shape a brand new intervention where we don't really know exactly how to do things because there's no outside theory to help guide us. So that's one example of a logic model. Go to the next one. One more, Dina, if you could. A very different logic model here, working with children. And you can see that there are a few arrows, but there's no boxes in this one. And it just has a lot of, it's basically revolving around a metaphor. And in this case, it's the apple tree that is the metaphor. And you can see the inputs, the sun, and you can see the activities, which they pictured as roots and all the different things that this particular program does. And then you can see the short-term outcomes, the buds before the apple is in existence. You need some precursor outcomes. And then you have the medium-term outcomes, which are the apples themselves. And And at the long term, it's all about the apple pie at the end, right? That's what we're shooting for. And so you can see some of the longer term outcomes that they identified. And then in this case, they also had an extra element acknowledging the context. And so you can see some of the challenges, the acid rain that is impinging on this particular program. It's becoming more and more common in our experience in the different evaluations that we work on that a metaphor-based logic model tends to really not only resonate with people's heads, the rationality of boxes and arrows, but also kind of the emotional impact that as you glance, you get a sense of the organization and that it somehow connects to you. So logic model is becoming a very creative exercise in a lot of different organizations. The sky's the limit in how you express that. It can be a fun exercise, an engaging exercise, it's lots of different types of pictures are coming out, but at the core, it also expresses those two things, right? The activities, what you're doing, and then the outcomes, the changes that you're hoping to see. The next slide just reiterates some things or just some final thoughts. In a community-based approach to evaluation, it really isn't about the logic model. It's not about having that page on your desk wall that shows the box and arrows or whatever, however you've depicted it. It's about trying to understand what we're really doing, and therefore as we evaluate, our understanding of what we're doing is actually changing. And so a good evaluation will actually change your program logic model. Your theory of change will deepen as you ask questions together about what you're doing and about the changes that you're hoping to see. So expect at the end of one cycle of evaluation that you're also changing your logic model for the next time. As you build a culture of evaluation, you're always deepening your theory of change. And it's always good to probe yourself, just in the last point there, and spend some time thinking about the connections between the different elements, like asking yourself, really, does this activity lead to this activity? Do these outcomes actually lead to these outcomes? Like, challenge yourself as opposed to being, sloppy. Think about really the relationships between the different elements that you have on a logic model. So that's step number 3. Is understanding your theory of change, collectively understanding what you are about, and that really helps to scope out the evaluation. And now the last step number 4, in the laying the foundation phase, is the purpose statement. In fact, we often have a phrase that we like to say that the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And in evaluation, the main thing is your purpose. There can be many different purposes for an evaluation. And you notice we haven't even talked tools yet, right? Information gathering strategies, surveys, or whatever, interviews. We haven't even got there yet because it depends on your purpose that will determine what kind of methods that you are choosing. And again, as in all steps of this phase, this step of determining the purpose is also a collective exercise. So your steering committee will help confirm the purpose. Maybe you can either have them co-develop it, or maybe you draft it as a research team and then bring it to them for their reaction. Whatever the process is, they need to own it, that this is the purpose of our particular evaluation in this particular cycle that we are going through. You should think about the interests of the different contributors, community contributors or stakeholders that are involved. It's easy to say you want to have a good evaluation statement. It's hard to write one clearly. And we'll break down the like the nomenclature, the main pieces of a good purpose statement in a second. But before we do that, I want to just throw out 3 different types of evaluations that your purpose statement should reflect. And you can think about which of these 3 types, or maybe there's a couple of them together, really reflects what you really want to do through your evaluation. And I'll actually start on the right-hand side because chronologically in the history of evaluation, which is only about, at least in North America is only about 50 years old. We started off with summative evaluation. And that's maybe more the traditional understanding of the word of evaluation. It has more of a judgment feel, right? That at the end of an intervention, at the end of a program, you stop and you think, what did we accomplish? And so it's more of a deterministic kind of approach to evaluation, a type of evaluation that looks at the successes and maybe the weaknesses of the program after the fact. That's a summative evaluation. Still very common. Formative evaluation kind of took that and said, well, you know what, we don't have to wait for the end. It doesn't only have to be about, good or bad kind of judgment. It can also be about shaping an ongoing way. And so we can use evaluation to improve a program, which means that data is coming at different points to be useful in decision making. And so that's more of a formative. So if you think of summative as being your theory, if linking it to the previous step to your theory of change, it's making judgments about how well you did on the process and to what extent you achieved the outcomes. Whereas formative also has a built-in, as we go along, how can we tweak our theory of change as we're going along? Both summative and formative assume that you are starting with a theory of change. And that's the distinction between them and the third type of evaluation. That's the developmental evaluation. That's the example that I showed you earlier, where when we started with version 1, there was hardly a theory of change. We had a little bit because in order to get funding, you usually have to describe some things and some aspirations for the funding that you're getting. So there was a little bit of a starting point, but really it was more like building the airplane as you're flying it, and over 3 years developing that program as we're going along. And so that's usually in the context of innovation. Maybe there's a complexity that's involved, but that's a different type of evaluation, and your purpose statement should reflect that. You can see at the bottom some verbs, and we'll get to the breakdown of a good evaluation statement in a moment. And a key part of an evaluation statement is the verb. What are you doing in your evaluation? And you can see some of the different verbs that kind of align somewhat with these different types of evaluation, from exploring to determining or assessing, right? That a very different feel to what you're trying to do. So keeping the main thing is being very clear together on the purpose of your evaluation. On the next slide, you can see our breakdown at the top of what are different components or different elements of a purpose statement. And I always like this beginning part because everybody can do that, just starting with the words, the purpose of this evaluation is to. At least you started it, right? You got something there. And then comes the verb, or maybe it's verbs. Choosing what kind of evaluation, what type of evaluation that you want to do. Your verb is really signaling a lot about the kind of methods that you want to be choosing in a moment. And then comes the meat and potatoes of the whole evaluation purpose statement, is that yellow part, which talks about the scope, like that's usually like what program you're dealing with, what kind of intervention is being evaluated. Maybe the target audience is included in there. It should give you a sense of process or outcomes or both, right in that part. And then because this is community-based evaluation and it has 3 hallmarks, right? It was community-driven, participatory, and action-oriented. That right in the purpose statement, right up front, before you're even collecting any information, you're already thinking about how are we going to use the results of the evaluation, and to be explicit of that. And often we have a phrase like in order to, or something similar to that, to kind of signal that we're shifting from trying to understand our current situation, that part of our purpose is also thinking about the future and what kind of future we want to have. And so that's where we also explain the action or the utilization focus of the evaluation, and naming that right into the purpose. And so you can see the purpose statement for that working together project that we had. It was in developmental evaluation. So you can see the purpose is to create, not assess or determine, create, a very open-ended, inductive kind of a verb. And then you can see the core of it, an ongoing evidence-based forum to inform and stimulate the project partners. There was a number of partners involved. And then comes the in order to, and then you see the use of the evaluation, right? Develop innovative approaches to improving vocational language skills of refugees in the workplace. So some of the things at the bottom of the logic model, the longer ultimate outcomes, were woven right into this purpose statement right at the end of it. On the next slide, there's a few other purpose statements, because not all evaluation is developmental. Most of evaluation is formative or summative, and you can see some of these other examples. As you look at them, you can now try to unpack them, right? Do you think they are summative, formative, developmental? Do you think they're process or outcome evaluations, or are they both? Can you start to anticipate perhaps some of the methods, the ways of gathering information that seem to be consistent with the verbs that are chosen? You can also see, if you look at the bottom one, it's more and more common in our purpose statements to bake right in before the verb, putting the word collaboratively, just as a reminder to us as we get busy, especially the research team that gets busy with the evaluation and does actually most of the work of the evaluation, as a reminder that, no, we're not just the ones that are doing this evaluation. It's not a delegated thing. It's also something that we do collaboratively with others. We need guidance. We need others to speak into it. Doesn't mean a lot of time for other people, but it's important to have that guiding function before the doers do anything, that the guiders guide them. Is that enough, Dina? Should I can keep going, or in time, should we?
We're doing good on time, but yeah, thank you, Rich. This yeah, whenever I hear you talk about this, I learn something new every time. So thank you very much. And I think now it's time for our breakout rooms. We are doing good on time, so maybe we can, what do you think? Like we scheduled initially 10 minutes for this, but maybe 15 minutes so people can engage in a more meaningful conversation. So Rich has walked us through, we've talked about the logic model, but we also, the second half of what Rich walked us through was the purpose statement, which again is one of the most common things that people get stuck on. So we wanted to spend more time just trying to unpack it a little bit. Possibly maybe some brave souls can start sharing their own purpose statements, and we can try to maybe give tweaks or feedback to it. So we're gonna split now into different breakout rooms. The facilitators will have this slide shared in order to facilitate the conversation. We're focusing on two main questions. The purpose of your evaluation that can translate into what verb would you use? And then also to bring it back to this iterative nature of the community-based evaluation, try to think of who are the stakeholders that should be engaged in defining this purpose statement. And if you have time in your groups, maybe you can start drafting a version of what your purpose statement might be, a hypothetical one or a real one, and then we can regroup and share a few thoughts. I'll hand it over to the KDE Hub team to split us up.
Thanks, Dina. So yeah, we're just going to be putting folks into breakout rooms, and that'll just be sort of a random assignment. And when you see the prompt, just hit join and you'll find yourself in a breakout room with others. So we'll see you there.
Welcome back, everyone. I just want to confirm with the KDE Hub team that everyone is back before we.
Everyone is back now. Perfect.
Okay. So yeah, I hope everyone had a good discussion in the breakout rooms. I wonder if anyone would like to share any thoughts or any ideas, whether about what came up in the conversations, or about your own purpose statement and like any aha moments, or I'll open it up. So yeah, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute. Yes, we will have questions portion at the end. I think we're doing well with time. So I can start on our end. It seems that a lot of people have a clear idea of what they're trying to evaluate, and then it's all about the subtleties of identifying the right verb or pinpointing what is the actual scope or the program. Is it, again, like the idea of whether we're doing process evaluation or outcome evaluation, and definitely the role of the stakeholders or who's on the table will influence what sort of evaluation purpose statement would look like. Deanne, Rich, do you have any other insights from your own groups? I like something that Katie said. I might not have it exactly right, but stakeholder engagement is not just who to bring to the table, but who built the table and who decided to meet at the table. So yeah, under whose terms, right? Like, are we meeting? Which also has like a decolonization perspective to it. Like, what are the rules of the game? Thank you for that. It's very insightful.
I think one of the comments that we had in our group was just the challenges of evaluation in general, that it can be overwhelming, particularly within communities who are who have a lot on their plate and who are dealing with a lot of issues, and there's a tiredness in communities, and then to have evaluation added onto that. So that engagement, there are some strategy or some challenges around that internal motivation, right, to want to evaluation. Another thing I heard was it's good to hear the different types of evaluation, because those verbs, right, that it's okay to be exploratory, it's okay to be assessing, it's okay to be understanding whatever verb you're choosing, and that you can decide that together. So it doesn't have to be, an either or of that, but be clear, and perhaps your verb will change the next cycle of evaluation.
Sounds good. Okay, so go ahead, please.
No, I think I have to echo what Rich was also saying. I think the same theme is kind of coming up in our group, and also the fact that there's a lot of different factors to consider when doing an evaluation, and so many people involved, and like Rich said, like the amount of time and effort it takes to put into evaluation, that came up. As well as the fact that people are appreciative of the fact that it's very cyclical, right? The processes, you can always go back to different steps and revisit different ideas and how you're doing things. So that was kind of an appreciative component of evaluation, just to kind of understand the different components and how challenging it could be.
Sounds great. Okay, so I'm glad people have had like different layers also of the discussion. It wasn't just focused on creating your evaluation purpose statement. So now we've covered those first 4 steps or dance steps, like Rich refers to them. And this was that took the biggest portion of today, because you can tell it takes a lot of time and effort. And again, it goes back to like, who are you inviting, and the capacity for like people's capacity to actually take part consistently. So it is very important to start strong and to start with this laying the foundation. The initial plan was not to talk about phase 2 at all, but I saw in the questions, even in the chat now, that there's a lot of interest. So I just wanted to foreshadow some of the ideas that we plan to cover in the next workshop, which will cover the remaining 3 phases. So there was a lot of interest in actually conducting evaluation. Not like we're often trying to pull people back, as like, before you jump into doing deciding on the methods, like there are a few steps that we need to cover first, and that's what we've spent some time doing so far. But yeah, I just wanted to give you a general sense of what also is entailed in during like the doing part, like the planning of the evaluation part. One thing that I wanted to talk about is in the first step or determining the evaluation question, the first step in phase 2 about the planning, because it is directly tied to the purpose statement that we all spent some time reflecting on. So there is this natural flow between the purpose statement and the research question. When we think of the research question, we're thinking that it should be answered at the end of your evaluation. It is, you can tell that there is a link to the purpose, and by answering those questions, you start to fulfill the purpose or of your evaluation, or you should start seeing some initial results of what to respond to the purpose statement. The research questions, again, like remember those flashy engagement pieces, it needs to reflect the interest of the stakeholders. So it's important to consult with the stakeholders about what sort of research questions are most relevant. We try to avoid yes or no questions. They have to be open-ended. We're asking about why and how questions. It relates to the process again. So we distinguish between we talk about the process and the outcomes. So it relates to the process, or how might a program be improved, and also the outcomes, which could entail what difference did this intervention make, or this program make, what changed as a result, what can be and this can be reflected in terms of numbers or experiences, and that will determine the kind of, and that's why it is important to have those conversations first, before, like Rich mentioned, before we start talking about the methods, because if we're looking into numbers, then maybe quantitative approach is better than a qualitative, and vice versa. And again, all these questions need to be tied back to the purpose statement and to be shaped by your steering committee and your stakeholders. I think a lot of people were waiting for this slide, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details. I just wanted to distinguish a little bit, or give you a sense of what the method menu for data collection could look like. And in general, we think about 2 different types of methods. And they have different, again, depending on your purpose statement and your research questions, they serve different purposes. Qualitative methods are about capturing stories or experiences. They're more on the subjective side. It's not about, did you experience this or that? It's not a yes or no question, but about how. Again, it's about the meaning of the meaning people's make about their experiences. They offer more in-depth and contextual information or data. On the other hand, there are the quantitative methods that may include surveys or census and so forth. They are good for breadth more than depth of understanding an issue. They're concerned with measurements and numbers, so we often use Likert scales or similar tools. It can be about experiences, but yeah, again, not too much in depth. And those experiences are often assigned numbers, like a scale again. So a few things just about those methods that I'd like to emphasize is one thing before, the arts-based methods, often they're categorized under qualitative methods, but we've been seeing it more often now that they're becoming their own thing. And that might be an indirect response to the initial questions about how do we engage youth. Often we see a lot of response to methods such as photo voice, body mapping, digital storytelling, or participatory videos, collages. Our colleague at the Center for Community-Based Research, Sarah Switzer, she was talking about how in one of their youth advisory committee meetings, they created their own playlists. So again, like that's why we were talking about like the devil's in the detail, and like it's not about particular method, but the delivery approach to it. So yeah, I hope that like demystifies a little bit how we can go about engaging different demographics. So I'll stop here about the methods with the promise that we will go more in depth in the next workshop, just because I want to allow some time for reflection and questions. Yeah, and here at the beginning we talked about like the workshop, the resources, and the one-on-one coaching sessions. The KDE Hub team is gonna walk you through how to book like a quick one-on-one session. If you want tailored support from our team, we are happy to offer that between now and the next workshop. But I also wanted to include a few resources here. Those are again tailored to different sectors, but they're highly adaptable to your own work. They include modules, actual toolkits, workbooks. The one at the bottom here is a youth-led research toolkit for some people might be interested in that, adapting it to youth population or demographics. And yeah, if you have any questions about them, I include at the end, before I just wrap this up, I will include at the end our contact. I'll just leave this Slido up if people would like to share any things that they would like to focus on in the next workshop, or if anything that stood out to you that you'd like us to elaborate on more in the next workshop. Again, the same, it's probably a different Slido, so if you just do the QR code or add the number, it will show like your comment in the slide. And I'll stop here to see if there are any questions. I noticed a few things in the chat. So Diane, do you have any?
No, I think if people are curious about when the next workshop is going to be, yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, so the next workshop is September 21st. And the last slide, I think, has this kind of information. I see some people adding brain on fire. Yeah, it's a lot of information. And that's why we are sharing with you the resources, so you can go at your own pace. And I believe also Aneta will be sharing those slides, so you can go through them slowly. Arts-based methods, yes, we have been seeing a lot of interest in that. And I believe there are a couple of we were talking, the KDE Hub team shared with me a blog, was it, or a report about arts-based methods with youth. So I wonder if you still have access to it, and if anyone can share it in the chat, it might be useful. Examples of the methods being used in practice, we'll keep that in mind. Yeah, just not talk about them theoretically, but show real life example, especially with arts-based ones. How to conduct, interpret, and use arts-based methods. Yes, absolutely. Managing multiple roles and limited resources. So yeah, capacity is, and I wonder if we should have, we should talk a little bit about like the different levels of how we understand capacity. There's the individual level, and like I'm happy to add that slide to the final slides that will be shared with everyone. There's the individual level, like building the capacity around the individual, and then there are other levels like making sure there's a culture of evaluation in your group, or making sure that the entire environment, like there's funding or like time. Volunteer-led organizations, they have different challenges than others, for example. So what we presented on focuses on the capacity building on the individual level and possibly on the organizational level. So yeah, it is definitely, capacity is it's a recurrent theme. That's all I have to say about it. Youth-friendly methods that can capture percentage satisfaction. Sure. How to analyze the data in a simple and clear way. We will definitely talk about that, and we will talk about having an analysis plan. External and internal evaluation, strengths and weaknesses. I mean, we touched a little bit on that today, about the difference between like an external led evaluation versus community-based evaluation. Obviously, community-based evaluation requires a lot of time and resources and commitment, but it is more flexible, and it has it's more, you can gear it towards you can tailor it to your own needs. It has more flexibility, more transparency, builds trust with the community. Oh, wow. So we still have a few more minutes. I just can't I can't monitor the chat. So Deanne, please feel free to just interject and add any comments that are not in the Slido chart or
Not as
slide.
yet, but there's a lot of interest in some one-on-one consultations to, like, I guess, further the evaluation process. So yeah, lots of interest in that for upcoming.
Yeah, and the good thing about Slido is that we can keep this open. So people, if you have any other ideas, even after our time is up, feel free to add to it. And I also believe there's going to be a feedback survey, so you can add to that one as well.
Dina, can I just interject too?
Yes.
That slide that you showed with the other resources, on that slide, most of those links lead you into toolkits that are based on the 4 phases, right? So they're CCBR toolkits that are based on those 4 phases, and some of them have some of those examples of methods and very concrete examples of how those 11 steps are actually being implemented. So I'm thinking of the bottom one, the youth-led research. It's a research as opposed to evaluation. Evaluation is one type of research, right? So you can easily transfer it over to evaluation. But there it walks based on our experience. One project we did in the country of Haiti with many 40 peer youth researchers that were leading the research. Concrete, every step was examples of how they did that particular step. So for example, like, what's a first agenda of a steering committee meeting, right? Like really practical resources like that. How do you analyze, what's a template for analyzing qualitative data? Well, there's their analysis template, right? So really for every one of those steps, some really concrete resources for that particular project in the methods that they used.
Thank you, Rich. Okay, I think I am ready to hand it over to KDE team. Let me stop sharing my screen. And I'm happy to continue to respond to any questions as they come, of course.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dina. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to kind of bring our conversation and our time together to a close. So first and foremost, thank you, Dina and Rich and Dina, for sharing your deep knowledge and your experience on community-based research. Like, you covered an incredible amount of information in the last 2 hours on phase 1 and phase 2 of the model, but in a very accessible and paced way. One of the comments in the breakout rooms is that evaluation can be scary, right? And it's a matter of taking something really complex like evaluation and breaking it down into smaller pieces that are accessible to understand and then to use. And the 3 of you were really successful in doing that this afternoon, so thank you. We are all really looking forward to part 2 of community-based evaluation, and that will be happening on September the 21st, which is a Thursday at 1:30. The one thing I'm taking away, I really like acronyms, and I've got in my mind now 33411, 33411. So I'm going to remember that, and that was I'm taking away a lot of different outcomes and tidbits, but that's one of them. It's great to see so many of the projects are really interested in doing a one-on-one with the folks at CCBR. And that's something that we are so happy to arrange. So anyone on this webinar who would like a one-on-one consultation with our colleagues here at CCBR, the hub is very happy to set up that consultation. So please just reach out to us and we will do that for you. And Annetta will place the hub email in the chat for you. So contact us and we will arrange a time that works for everyone's schedule. And as always, we really value feedback. So Annetta will also be posting a short survey in the chat, and we ask you to fill it out. We'd really appreciate to hear your thoughts on today's webinar. Lots of questions. Where do I get these slides? Where do I get these resources? As always, we will be preparing an event brief in addition to the slides today that was shared, and also the resources. And so that will be posted on our website at the kde.ca. So of course, you're welcome to access any of those. I think we can go to the next slide. I think that basically covered the housekeeping, but we do have one more slide, and that's our next webinar that's coming up on July the 12th on creating engaging social media, lessons from a social media pro. And that pro is Tim Campbell-Smith. And I've had the opportunity of meeting Tim in the last week or so, and this is definitely one webinar that you don't want to miss. We heard from many of the projects that social engagement is a topic that many people want to know more about. And so we have responded by offering this webinar with Tim. The focus of the webinar is really how to speak to organizations and how they can use social media to reach and engage different audiences. And so all of the projects at the KDE Hub will be invited to this webinar coming up on July the 12th. And Annetta will also post the link on how to register in the chat. So again, please join us for our next webinar. And just to again reiterate, part 2 with our colleagues at the CCBR will be offered in September the 21st. So I think that pretty much with 1 minute to go, I think I can do this in 60 seconds. And that's just to say thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your positive energy and your questions. And we invite you to enjoy the rest of your day. And we look forward to spending the next time together. And if that's in a webinar form, that will be in July and then September. And again, happy to mediate those consultations with CCBR. So thanks again, and we will see you later. Bye-bye.